Well, to get some deeper insight on the recent Iranian president's trip to Latin America, we're now joined by author and politician Christoph Orstel, who's joining us from Berlin. Also, we have political scientist Heinz Giertner, who's joining us from Vienna. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Let's start off with Mr. Horstel in Berlin. Give us your perspective on the importance of the recent tour of Latin America conducted by the Iranian President Ebrahim Raeisi.
That's a very important trip. It shows various things. First of all, it shows that Washington is weak. The USA are weak in this time, and they're weakening by the year. Second point is that Latin America is coming forward and getting more courage, also by the example of Venezuela, of Nicaragua, of Cuba, to resist Washington's arrogant and oppressive policies. And of course, it's also a question of undermining countries. And Venezuela was the victim for more than 20 years of undermining efforts by Washington. And the third point is, of course, that Iran's standing globally has risen with the fact that with the big regional foe, Saudi Arabia, a good accord has been struck with the help of China. And that is very important for the whole region. And the visit now combines the good effects in both regions, Latin America and the Middle East, through both sides' efforts.
And also, let's get the similar question from Mr. Giertner. Your thoughts on the significance and the importance of this trip by the Iranian president to the three Latin American nations?
Yeah, of course. First of all, Iran wants to enhance cooperation with Latin American countries in various fields like science, technology, energy, also tourism. These countries are important because they have lots of common. Of course, all these countries are under US sanctions, but all these countries also want to resist American unilateralism. So to some extent, they have no other choice than to cooperate. But I have to say these are not the most important countries in Latin America. And the cooperation has to go beyond these three countries. There has to be a diversification of relations, for example, especially to better relations to Brazil and Argentina. Of course, these countries have to cooperate because the GCPOA failed, and now the sanctions are imposed on these countries. But now the GCPOA has to be revived in order to make it possible to diversify Iran's economic and diplomatic relations. And I want to remind you that Brazil and Turkey already played an important role to facilitate the GCPOA in 2010. And maybe they can, countries from the global south and maybe Brazil again can play an important role again and make some offers.
Christoph Orstel, let's talk about an interesting term that the Iranian president used. He spoke of independent nations, talking about Nicaragua and talking about Iran as well. What is the driving force, in your opinion, that is bringing these so-called independent nations closer and closer together, as opposing to the usual style of the Western hegemony that we've been seeing for so long now?
There's something forming in the international arena, what His Excellency the Supreme Leader has called the New World Order geometry. And here in this trip of President Raeisi to Latin America, we see this New World Order geometry at work, practically at work. And very much correct, Mr. Gärtner has pointed out in Vienna, that these are not the most important countries, but of course that's a very important entrance. That's an important beginning. And of course there will be further relations. Also Brazil is quite resilient and quite strong, quite independent. And they do have their compromises, as we all have, so to say. As a German, I know exactly what I'm talking about. And this is, in fact, something that has to be slowly overcome. But the strategy is correct. A new world order geometry uniting so many countries and people striving for independence, true independence, and for cooperation among the independent countries. That's the importance of this trip. This was strengthened, and that is the right way to go. And of course, there's a lot of work to be done in the future, but the beginning was already very helpful.
And Mr. Geithner, your thoughts on the same issue as well. What could be the driving force that are bringing so many independent nations together and forming this what our guest also from Berlin mentioned as a new, an emerging world order?
The emerging world order, of course, is characterized in many ways on a multipolar order, and also, as you might call it, independent states might emerge. However, that is not sufficient for a new world order. Polarity is always connected to polarization as well. So if multipolarity is not accompanied by multilateralism, it might fail and bring new conflicts. So multilateralism has to be resurrected now, because now, of course, multilateralism, because of the war in Ukraine, so far has pushed to the back in the international relations. But I just want to remind you that the European Union, now the E3, called the GCPOA as a masterpiece of effective multilateralism. And that should be an example for future relations. It goes beyond, of course, the GCPOA, but multilateralism, independence is fine, but independence without multilateralism does not lead to cooperation. It might lead to isolation.
Sure, and one last issue that we want to focus on here, Mr. Horstl, in Berlin, is the issue of the de-dollarization of bilateral trade and trade within blocs. For example, the BRICS blocs, maybe the SCO, some Latin American countries. There's been a lot of focus on trying to take away the emphasis on the greenback in global trade. Can you elaborate on that for us as well, and how trips like this by the Iranian president can move in the direction of advancing that perspective?
Yeah, Brazil is the big mainstay of BRICS in Latin America, and the founding member, so to say. And also in this regard, this is a success story about BRICS, because 4 weeks ago we had 16 further countries applying for membership, and now I hear we have over 30. So the isolation of Washington as a monopolar, so to say, unipolar world dominator, that is disappearing so quickly. That's really astonishing. And of course, this trip of President Raisi has done something to also foster this idea. If trade is being enhanced, if the independence of the countries are being reinforced, if there's cooperation between the continents, like between Iran and Latin America, these are the things that are necessary, that are helpful, in fact, to prepare the ground for a huge membership of BRICS, which is then able to de-dollarize much stronger than we are seeing it already today. But that victory is on the wall. That's quite clear that will happen.
Mr. Geithner, also your thoughts on the issue of de-dollarization among certain blocs and lowering the importance of the greenback in bilateral trade amongst many countries. Do you see that gaining steam?
Yes, but it's to some extent the fault of Washington itself. Because of Washington's sanctions policy, of course, countries look for alternatives to the dollar, because the dollar is the most important instrument for sanctions for Washington. So, and if now countries looking for alternatives here, it might be an incentive also for Washington to be more cooperative and to look for other alternatives. For example, it might be an incentive for Washington also to come back to the nuclear deal, to the GCPOA. Many instruments of Washington, of course, has to be rethought because we have a global South now thinking, it's not anti-American. No, the global South most of the time is not anti-American. But they are looking for more non-alignment, more neutrality, more independence, but also multilateralism among themselves, and in order not to be dominated by unipolar power.
All right, thanks a lot, gentlemen. Author and politician Christoph Orstel joining us from Berlin, and thanks to political scientist Heinz Gidner joining us from Vienna.